Good afternoon, and thank you for joining VDCC's monthly webinar. Today, we're focusing on Visual Integrator. I'd like to introduce Jessie Braun. Jessie is one of the rock stars on our team, slowly moving into a little bit of a sales role along with her expert consulting, and is sure to wow you today. Jessie, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Kelly, and thanks everyone for joining today. So what we're going to do is take a look at the Visual Integrator tool in Sage 100. Visual Integrator, if you haven't heard of it before, it's a data that's used to export data from and import data into your system. Since there are a lot of ways to export data, I'm going to focus on how to import data using this tool because this is really what the tool is built for, importing that data into Sage. We're going to discuss resources for beginning your import project, different types of imports, review the creation of the import, and go over a few examples so you really get a feel for the process. One thing I'd like y'all to keep in mind, Visual Integrator generally comes with your Sage subscription, but if you're on the perpetual version, not on subscription, it's possible you might not have this module standard. So if you're in your Sage software, take a look at your modules list and see if you have Visual Integrator. If you don't see this as a module on your menu, give us a call. We can take a look at it and we can see if either you have the module and it's not installed, you don't have access to it, or it's something that we need to look at adding for you. So let's dive into the Visual Integrator. And the first thing that I'm going to bring up, one of the main things you need when creating Visual Integrator, is a good understanding of the Sage 100 tables. So what I'm going to do is give you some tips, some resources, and some tricks on understanding what tables you're looking at and how to pick the correct both files and fields in the system. So first of all, we're going to start in our little information center over here. You guys have probably seen this dashboard screen every single time you log into Sage and think, gosh, I really wish this wasn't there. I don't need anything on here. Well, you do today. So we're going to scroll down. We're going to come to our resources. Under resources, there is a lot of good information here, but I spent a lot of time in this file layouts and program information. From here, we've got a whole bunch of different stuff, but what I want to show you first is this file and table listing. It's going to give us a listing of all the different modules. So if I click on Accounts Receivable Table Listing, these are all the different names of the tables behind Sage. Kind of useful, but maybe not that much. So once we've picked our, let me show you how to decide what table to start with, and then we'll take a look at the file layouts. I'm just seeing a question here saying, should we be able to hear something? And I'm concerned that other people aren't able to hear. Let's see, if y'all could raise your hand in the thing here if you can hear me. It might just be, okay, good. So I think it's just Shanna. So hang on one second here. And thank you all for responding. I just want to make sure. So sorry about that. Thanks. I'm going to go ahead and continue. I appreciate you guys hanging with me here. We are recording this, so we can always come back and review this again. So let's figure out what table we're going to pick here. If we come up to the accounts receivable, and I'm going to pull up our customer maintenance. So when I pull up customer maintenance, I can pull up a customer. It doesn't, you might want to use this to figure out what fields, what I want to import into. I'm going to do an example where we import into the price level and overwrite the price level here. But how do I know the name of this table? If we right click on any of our blank space and we come to system info, it's going to tell us right here, our current file is AR_customer. So now to give you a different example, if we come over here to, for example, our customer contacts, I'm going to do the same thing, find the white space, click System Info, and this table is called AR Customer Contact. So this is a great way for you to figure out which table we're working with. Then we can start to figure out what fields we want from that table. To find the fields that we're looking for, to understand the fields that are in here, we're going to come over here to File Layouts. I'm going to find my module, and then I'm going to scroll down and find my table, AR Customer. And you can see we've also got AR Customer Contact. But for right now, let's bring up AR Customer. I'm going to minimize this a little bit. I know the font is real small. Hopefully you guys can see enough here that'll be useful. So first things first, I do want to point out some information up at the top. We've got this field that says exclude VI no N. This means that you can import into this table using Visual Integrator. To give you an example of one that doesn't work, we come to this customer contact listing WRK or work table. Our exclude VI is yes. You cannot import into a work table, and we also don't recommend importing into a history table. So let's come back over here to our AR customer. We know we can import into this table. Let's take a look at how to read this information down here, because you can see it's pretty technical looking. So I'm going to go through each of the different columns here and explain what they are, what they do. Field number, this isn't really important, but the column name is. You want to know what column you are working in. We've got the fields like AR division number, customer name, etc. Then we have a field that says M/L. I'm going to interpret this for you. I'm going to interpret all of this for you. M stands for mask, and L stands for length. Depending on if you have a number field or a string field, you're either going to have a mask for a number or a length for a string field. So this is defining for us how long is this field in the system. Our division is only 2 characters. Our customer number, however, is 20 characters. And if we scroll way down here till we get to our number fields, you can see that, for example, here we have 13 places to the left and 3 places to the right for a customer discount rate. So this is just basically telling us the length of the field. Next, we have TUR. TUR are all different fields. So each column here, T represents something, U represents something, R represents something. T first stands for the type of field. We either have a string field, so S for string, or an N field, like I showed you down here, N for number. So it's either going to be a string or a number field. Our U stands for uppercase. Is the field required to be uppercase or not? You can see our customer number here has a Y, so that means this is an uppercase only field. The R stands for required, and this one is really important. You need to know if fields are required by the system so that when you do your import, you are putting through those required fields. Then under the description and notes, there's a ton of information here. I won't go into all of it, but I did want to point out one that's really important. So let me find our customer status. So in your customer record, you've got your customer status. And this over here in our notes is telling us the default value of this is A, which means active. Well, how do I know it means active? Aha, this notes gives us that key to say what do each of the different values mean. So what are the valid values? A, I, and T. What do they mean? A equal active, I equal inactive, T equal temporary. So the customer notes or the notes field that's over here can give you some valuable information about how how to interpret the field that you're working on. So that is really what I wanted to show you about the file layouts for right now. And some common tables, I just wanted to point out a few common tables that you might use in a Visual Integrator import and point out a few things about them. So I showed you AR customer. AP vendor would be another common one. You're bringing information in and you are, you might be bringing in starting information, or you might just be changing a field for a customer, for a vendor, etc. Another common field might be your item table, right? And this is kind of a tricky one. So this is one that I wanted to point out. You would think that your item table would be under the inventory management module. However, in Sage, because the item table is shared between miscellaneous items and inventory items, we actually find it under common information item. So CI item is going to be your inventory table, and just keep that in mind as you're building visual integrators. Some other common tables you might do, you might want to import a budget into the system, and I'm actually going to show that as an example. You might also want to import into AP invoice or a sales order invoice. These are all things that can be done in the system. When you choose a table that's sort of a processing table, so something that's more like a sales order or an invoice, you are going to likely have both a header and a detail table to write into, so you do want to keep that in mind. Okay. So there are two different ways to go about your creation of the Visual Integrator. We're just about to look at Visual Integrator finally, so don't worry, hang in there with me. There are two different ways. You can either start with your data set that you would create in an Excel template or an Excel file and create the Visual Integrator around that Excel sheet, or you can create the Visual Integrator and then format your Excel sheet. I tend to prefer going the first way, as it's a lot easier to adjust your Visual Integrator job to fit the spreadsheet than it is to, it's harder and more time consuming to change your spreadsheet. So I just want to bring up here on my desktop, just going to show you this file. So I've got a data file that's got our customer number and some other information in it. And we're going to use this as our template for creating a really simple customer import. Okay. You can see that I created this as a CSV file, and I'll show you what we're going to do with that. So we're going to come into Visual Integrator. We're going to go to Import Job Maintenance. We've got to give this a name. So I'm going to call this customer. And then we need to choose our table, everything that we just did over here with our resources. So we know that we're looking for, sorry, I scrolled way past it, AR customer. Okay. It takes a minute. It wants to review and say, do I have this? Do I have this already? Oops, sorry, popped up behind something else. So it asked me, is this a new job? And I just wanted to say, yes, it is a new job. We can put in a description here. So we can put in a longer description that says, this is what this import job does. I highly recommend this if you're doing a lot of imports, because you want to be able to keep track of this, okay? We have to choose a file type. I recommend leaving this at delimited and making our delimiter that comma. That's our CSV, our comma separated values file, okay? There are some other options. I am not going to go into them today. They're much more technical, and I always use the delimited file. We can set a default import file. However, when we actually run the job, we'll be able to select the file that we're looking for too. So I'm going to leave this blank for right now. And now we're going to come over to the data. On the left here, you can see a whole list of available fields to us. Now, you'll notice that there's some color coding here. The blue fields represent required fields. So the system requires the division number and the customer number if you're going to import into the customer record. And so it's already inserted them into the file, and the blue means that they are required. You can't remove them. Okay? Pink fields are conditionally required, meaning that if certain circumstances sit in place, then you need to use them. For example, I'm going to scroll down here and say, take a look at the tax schedule. Tax schedule comes up in pink, and that means that that field is required. However, if I've already set the tax schedule up in the customer and I'm just writing additional data in, I don't need to define it every time. It's already been defined by the system. So pink, conditionally required. Our teal fields, like this terms code here, these have a default value that's assigned to them. So if you don't define your terms code, if you haven't defined your terms code, it will default to 00. You can find that default value here in your file layouts. So again, more information from that file layouts. If we had any red fields are system defined read-only fields. You can't write into them. Okay. And then our black fields, they are not validated by the import. In some cases, they might be required, but generally speaking, they're additional fields that you can import into. Okay. So that's the fields on the left. On the right over here, we've got a ton more information. So first of all, we've got our field name. So this is a list of all of the fields that I've added or removed or that came through automatically on this import, just like these. If you want to add and remove fields, you can see we've got our arrows. So I'm actually going to take out terms, code, status, open item. We don't need any of these because we're writing into an existing customer file. So I'm going to take those out and only leave my blue required fields. I use this little arrow, move it over to the left, it's gone. And then I'm going to find customer price level, and we're going to bring that over, and we're going to do an import that brings in a new customer price level. Okay. So that's how you add and remove fields. These are our field names. Type. This is S for string. So again, just like in our resources, you can see it's S for string. I want to point out that we have more options than just string and numeric. So if I bring over date of last activity, you can see that this is a D, a date field. Okay. We don't need that one, so I'm not going to import that one in. If we had any numeric fields, they would be listed as N. So the type tells you what type of field you're defining. Then we have our operator. And to get into those options, I need to drill down a little bit. I just want to finish going through this, and then we'll get into the details. Okay. So we've got our operator. What are we doing with this field? We've got the column or position that it's pulling from. We've got the length of the field, just like in our resources, and what's the mask or the default value for this field. Okay. So let's dig into the operators, our columns, and all of this information that makes our Visual Integrator an active tool. To define this, we're going to double click, and it opens a new window for us. This is our import field properties. And we've got a whole bunch of different operators. You can see our EPL replace. Okay. So once we define this and we go back, it will kind of give you an indication what we're doing with each of these fields. Let's talk about all of the different operations that could be used. We can replace, we can assign, and that would be giving it a static value and entering a default. And I will show you that because we are going to do that for our customer price level. We can file assign. What this will allow us to do is pull from another field in Sage. So a good example of this might be if you're doing an import of invoices, but they're related to the sales order, you might want to pull the shipping information, the shipping address from that sales order. We can say file assign, look at that sales order table, and then assign the shipping address based on what's in the sales order. We can runtime assign. Runtime assign is going to allow you to enter data when you run the job. And you can put in a prompting text that says, for example, let's say you wanted to assign the date of an invoice batch that you're importing. You would say, what's the invoice date? And then as you run the job, you would define that. We can incrementally assign. Incrementally assign is sort of like runtime assign. You would choose a starting number at the import time, and then it would incrementally go up. I have to be honest, I don't know that I've ever used incrementally assign. It's not a frequent one, that you would use here. We have calculated, which allows us to do simple calculations and formulas. I've seen this used maybe where you want to combine fields of data from two different columns. Let's say you had two different columns of data that you wanted to insert both of those into a comment field. What we would do, we would make this calculated. We would send the information over and say, add column 1 with column 2, and that's what this field is going to be now. Okay. And then our last operator, we have next. This is going to be used for like sales order numbers. If you're importing into a sales order file and you want it to take the system default next record, we can use that next. Just to point out, if I click next here, I get a little pop-up that says, this is invalid. You can't use next on this file because it just doesn't, it's not a next type of file. Okay. So let's actually create the map here from our Excel sheet. So I'm going to pop this up over here. I'm going to bring that import information back, and we're going to figure out how we're going to get our fields so that we can do this import. So our AR division number. Well, you can see here in column 1, we've got both the division number and the customer number. You could do something to separate these, in Excel and separate them out into 2 columns. However, Visual Integrator also does allow you to define what part of a field that you want to use. So we're going to replace the division number with column 1. But we're also going to say in the source, it's a substring, so it's only a portion of that first column. What position should I start it at? And how long is it? It takes it from the system length, so it's saying for position 1 and position 2, that is my AR division number. Position 1, position 2, division. Pretty cool. Next, we can pull our customer number. The system is thinking that we should be pulling from column 2. However, we're going to pull from column 1 because we know that the customer number is in column 1, but it's also a substring. And then we need to define what's our starting position. Well, we've got 1, 2, and the dash counts, so that's 3. So it's always going to start at position 4. So we can say position 4. It's recalculated the length of the field. And now we can go ahead and click accept. So we're saying go from position 4. Then we might want to, we're assigning all of our customers to the same price level. That's what we're going to do for today, just for the example. So I'm going to double click on price level. And instead of replace, what we're going to do is we're going to assign it. When you click assign, we need to put in the default value. So here, I'm going to type in the default value of A. We're going to assign price level A to all of our customers in this list, okay? So this is an extremely simple setup, but I think it's a really good way for you to kind of get used to, how you might set up a simple Visual Integrator import. Once you've created your map, and this is all we're going to do with it, this is all I want to do with it, we're going to click the accept button. And then we get a prompt that says, would you like to execute this job? I'm going to go ahead and say yes, because I do. Now we're going to actually import it, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. We click yes, and a new screen comes up for us. We can choose an import file name. So we know that the import file is going to be this customer import, right? It's the field that, or the file that we've got right back here. I always like to test this before I import, right? Because you want to make sure that there's no bad data in there. So we go ahead and click test. It's asking us, how many records of this file would you like to test? Unless it's a massive file, I click all records so that we can, test everything that's in the file. And then we click OK. And, oh, I get an error. What is this error? Obviously, I did this on purpose because I want you to see this error in case you ever run across it. Unable to open my file. Well, of course I'm unable to open it. I've got it open in the background. The system wants you to be closed out of your import file before you import. So we're going to click OK, and we're going to try to test again. So that time our test worked, and it's giving us a little summary of what happened. It read the records, and it would have, if it wasn't a test, import all those records. It didn't skip any, and it didn't fail any, and there were no fields with invalid records. We can take a look at the job log, but I'm going to hold off on that for another example. So I'm going to go ahead and say, I don't need to view this job log. We're good. I've tested it. I think this works. Let's go ahead and do that. Prompts us, do you want to import? Are you sure? Gives you one last chance to make any changes. The answer is yes. Okay. And so again, it gives us our little summary. It read all the records. It imported all the records. It didn't skip. It didn't fail. We're all good to go. When you're done with your import, the whole window closes. And I just want to quickly show you the results. Now, if I pull up one of our customers here and I come to our additional tab, you can see that the price level is now listed as A. So our import worked. We got information into the system. Pretty cool. All right, so the next example that I wanted to do is a little bit more complex because I wanted to give you a good idea of both a simple one and one that we're putting into an actual, like a processing file. And one that I frequently get here is budgets. People want to import their budget. So let's take a look at the budget. I just want to point out here, we can't go directly into budget maintenance. We have to go into our budget revision entry. So how do I know this? I know this because if we come into Visual Integrator and we start creating a new job for our budget, when we look at our table names, if we come to the GL file, here we go, here's all my GL, you can see that the only table that's available here is budget revision. Okay, so we need to put this into our budget revision. So I'm going to go ahead and start this job for a budget revision. A minute here gives us this prompt. Is this a new job? We can say yes. We're going to leave all this information alone and come over to our data. The reason I wanted to show budget is because this is a fairly simple import. We've got a few things here that we need to define, and then we've got our budgets that are listed here. So our fiscal year, what fiscal year are we going to import into? Is that a column in our data? Well, I haven't shown you the data set yet, so let's take a look at the data set. So this might be your data set. You've got your account number, you've got the description of that account number, and then we've got information by period for 12 periods, okay? So nothing about fiscal year, and there's probably a good reason for that. You're not gonna import multiple fiscal years into your budget. So what we can do with this is assign the fiscal year, and because this is a test system, bear with me, we're going into 2025. That's where we're doing the import for. So we're assigning our fiscal year. Then we need to say what column is our account in. It's in column 1. So we're going to replace, and we're going to change this to column 1. What's our budget code? Again, we're importing into one budget code, so we're going to assign, and I'm going to give it the budget code original. That's one that I know I have in the system. And then, because we've got all of these columns of data, right, we need to pull over all of the revised budgets for 1 through 12. So we can use these arrows, or we can double click. I'm going to go ahead and use the arrows because it's a little bit faster actually. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We don't need 13 because in this company code, we don't have a 13th period. That all depends on your fiscal year setup. But we can see we've got column 1 is our account, column 2 is description, column 3 is our period. This is listed as column 4 for the period. So we need to go in and adjust. But how much of a pain is it to go in to each one of these and change them? It's a pain. So Sage gives us a nice little tool. If we click the recalc button and then click accept, it's going to imply for us, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It said, okay, all the other columns are in order. Okay, so this is the basics of our import. We've got our account key. We've got all of our periods with information in each of the cells. And we've got our map. So now that I've created this, I'm actually ready to import this again right away. I'm going to go ahead and execute. And I'm sorry, things are popping up on my main screen here, so that's why I keep dragging things over. We need to choose our import file. I'm going to remember this time to close this. I'm not going to save any changes. So we're going to select our import file. Then we're going to go ahead and test. So this time it read 13, it imported 4, but one of those records failed. So we want to see what happened, what record failed. So this time we are going to view the job log. Any failed record is going to come up here in red. And if we double click, it's going to give us more information about why it failed. Okay, so this failed because the account key, account. Aha. So in our import file, we still have header information. So you can remove this header information. There are some complex ways that you can code in to, remove the header. But I just find it simplest to just take out my header before I do the import. I'm going to leave it in because I want you to see what happens when we try to import with a failed record, just as an example. So coming back over here, we've decided, okay, this failed. It failed, but I'm kind of okay with that. I wanted it to fail. I don't need to import that first line. Everything else passed, so we should be good. And we can go ahead and click accept. We're going to go ahead and import this. It's giving us our last warning. Do you want to import records into company VIS? Yes. Yes. It's given us our same summary. We know the record that failed, so we really don't need to look at it again. We don't need to look at the job log. Once we've done the import, let's go ahead and take a look at our results. So we're going to go into General Ledger, Budget, and Budget Revision Entry, because that is the table that we wanted to import into. So you can see here, it's listed all of those accounts. It's got all of the information by period, and you can see we actually have a change here in period 7. The budget goes up. Yeah, it just imports all the information for you. So if you're already doing your budget in an Excel spreadsheet, this is just a really, really simple way to, bring that budget into the system and actually be able to use it. Okay. Because this is an entry table, we do have a chance to make changes, to delete it, to delete our entries before we run the register. Okay, so something that you want to keep in mind is that if you're going into an entry table like budget, like cash receipts entry or invoice data entry, that can all still be deleted and changed. But when you're going into like a customer table, once you do the import, it's done, right? That's why it gives you that last little chance to make any changes. All right, so next on Visual Integrator, actually, normally I would wait until the end, but I want to address a couple of these questions because the rest of the stuff I'm going to go through are just a few little tips and tricks. So I've got somebody asked, all the records that did not fail will be accepted. That is correct. So when you're doing the import, only the failed records will close out, and all of the ones that had passed, those will go into the system. So that is a good, that is true that any failed record, it'll just skip that failed record. If you screw up, is there an undo? Like I just mentioned, if you're going into like customer maintenance table, no. Once you import, it's done. If you're going into a data table, you can always go back and delete those data files before you update them. A processing file. So cash receipts, budgets, general ledger, general journal entries, that kind of thing. Okay. And then I've got a question, can you use VI for customer contacts? Yes, so the customer contact table is a field that is accessible via Visual Integrator. And if you want to talk more specifically about that, I will be happy to chat some more with you about it, about your specific situation. Each Visual Integrator really is kind of unique. All right, so I'll add a few more things here and then we'll switch over, and if anybody else has questions, please type them in and I'll address the rest of them at the end. So if you're going to run a Visual Integrator more frequently, you might want to not have to always go through the job creation maintenance, okay? So you might want to go and add this. I'm going to do my budget import every year. I want to add this to a menu so that the person who uses it can access it through here every single time. So we're pulling up our budget revision, and I'm going to make a little adjustment to this because if we're going to be running this budget import year after year, we might not want to assign this fiscal year value. Maybe what we want to do is have this as a runtime assign. So when you run it, you're going to define the year. So I'm going to take out this default value of 2025, and then I'm going to come down to the prompt and type in, what is the fiscal year? Okay. And so when we run our job, it's going to prompt us, what is the fiscal year? And we'll be able to continue our processing from there. But now that I've done that, let's add this to the menu. So we're going to come to configuration, and we've got this button, menu. It takes us through a little wizard. We're going to add this. We're going to add a task to the menu. It wants you to select the job name. So we're going to select our budget, and it's going to ask us to give the task a name. So we can call this yearly budget import. Okay. Then it wants you to define who should have access to this. I'm going to give this to the all access role. But you can add multiple roles here, or you can just add everybody, give everyone access. Okay. If you've not given somebody access, not given a role access that you need later on, you can get to this through role maintenance and add people. Okay. So we just click finish, and now I had to go out of the module and back in, but now you can see we've got a jobs menu. Right under here, if we click yearly budget import, it's going to take us right to the importing screen. So it takes us immediately to that, and you can see here's our little prompt. So that's pretty cool. Again, you're going to want to use that where you have jobs you're going to be running more frequently. So that is a good thing. And like I showed you with the wizard to set this job up, you can restrict access to the Visual Integrator by role. I do recommend that because you don't want somebody playing around with it or messing around with it and not actually, you know, doing anything there or messing something up, I guess. So that is pretty much what I've got for Visual Integrator. I do want to point out, though, there are some cool new features that are coming in the 2020 Product Update 1 version of Sage. I know we have very, very few customers on 2020 yet because we you know, like to wait for Product Update 1 to come out before we start moving people over to it. But I did want to mention these new features coming. When we're in here and we take a look at the job log can now be filtered to show only the errors, only the failed records. That's a brand new thing. It used to just give you a long list and you'd have to scroll through and look for the red. Oops, yep, stop, go back. Okay, now I've got it. So now we can filter to only show those failed records. The log detail is also going to show the row number from your source file. So if there's an error, it will tell you exactly what row to look in your spreadsheet for that error. So that's a huge, huge help. And this import-export screen will also use the company screen color. So that is a new thing for this. If you use different company screen colors, Visual Integrator in 2020 Product Update 1 will show that background screen color. And Product Update 1 is set to be released sometime this month, so we do expect it soon. All right. Well, thank you all for hanging with me. I gave you a ton of data, a ton of information. I do have a couple more questions here. So, can you use VI for importing new employees? Yes, you definitely can. It's about figuring out that map and making sure that you've got the mapping correct. It might be more efficient to just enter the employee if you have, you know, let's say less than 5 employees. But if you have a whole list of new employees and you need to bring them all in, an import will be a good way to do that. And I would say also that that's a general rule as well. If you have a lot of records to import, Visual Integrator is a great tool. If you just have a couple, I mean, the time to set up a new job, how does that balance against just manually entering the data? And that's a consideration you want to make before you even begin thinking about doing a Visual Integrator job. So I've got a question here that says, I did my budget through import through the General Ledger Exchange last year. Would this be an easier method? It looks like they don't see VI on the module listing. We can take a look at that and see, you know, with you. I can take a look and find out if you guys do have that. But is this better through Visual Integrator or GL Exchange? It really depends. If you already have your GL Exchange set up for budget, it's not too bad. GL Exchange is a little bit limited as a tool just because it's a wizard walkthrough. You don't have as much capability to define the data the way that you want it as you do with Visual Integrator. So, you know, if you've got an import that's working through GL Exchange and you're kind of happy with it, I say stick with it. But if it is cumbersome, if it's problematic, if you're, you know, spending a lot of time getting things in there, definitely worth looking at Visual Integrator as a tool. So thank you. Thank you everyone for the questions. I love getting questions in these. If anybody else had any questions, you know, please type them into the chat. I think that was basically the content that I had today. And really, thank you everyone for coming. I hope you took some good information away from this. If you were already familiar with Visual Integrator, I hope I gave you a few new tools that maybe you didn't understand before about the file layouts, or that you picked up a few tips and tricks. As you saw, it's a very complex, it's a very robust tool. So there are a ton, I barely scratched the surface here of all the different options. We can get into really complex calculated files with temporary fields. And so if you have an import that's really complex, give us a call. We've got a lot of different options for you and a lot of experience working with this tool. So I don't see any more questions that came in. If there is something after, please feel free to send us, a question. We're more than happy to talk with you about this. I love talking about Visual Integrator. It's really a fun tool, and I hope you all enjoyed it today. I'm going to go ahead and close out the webinar now, and thanks again for coming. Have a great day.